Spenser, employment growth has practically stalled, or at least has slowed down considerably so far this year. Does this mean we are on the cusp of a recession?
We don't think so. We think there are two key policies that have slowed down non-farm payroll growth this year. Firstly, we think tariffs have slowed down growth in industries that are very exposed to imports, such as durable goods and manufacturing. However, the other side of this is that we think that there's a little bit of a labor supply shock related to a slowdown in immigration from the administration's tight immigration policies. And as a result, there are just simply fewer immigrants and fewer laborers to hire. So while there is a little bit of softening in the labor market, we think it's a little bit of a mirage based on these immigration policies, and therefore we don't think a recession is likely or around the corner.
Okay, so unemployment might not be a big problem, or at least not right now. What about inflation? Is this all tariff-induced, or do we have a real problem?
Yeah, so within inflation, there are sort of two trends going on. One is on the core services side, and then on the housing and rents side. And the inflation with those two things has really been steadily coming down over the last couple of years and continues to be in a pretty disinflationary state and not far above where we were in pre-COVID, at pre-COVID levels. The second trend sort of going on are tariff-related inflation that's being passed through to goods. And we do think that goods inflation is probably going to rise a little bit more from here, and core PCE is likely to end the year around 3 to 3.3%. But we think as long as the Fed is willing to look through that, as Chair Powell said that they are at the recent Jackson Hole speech, and they are willing to start cutting interest rates, then that's okay. And then we're likely to start to see disinflation pick up again in 2026.
Okay, we talked about employment, we talked about inflation. That is the dual mandate. That's what the Fed's looking at.
Sure is.
Can you follow it a little bit further and talk about where you foresee the Fed's actions will take us going forward?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we think that's one of the most critical things for markets going forward. We do think that Chair Powell's speech at Jackson Hole did make it very clear to us that the Fed was prioritizing softness in the labor market as opposed to inflation, and that they are likely to begin cutting interest rates very soon. We think they're probably going to cut interest rates a few times this year and then again into next year. And that should actually provide a pretty good backdrop as we look forward to 2026 for markets.
Does the Fed's current and perhaps changing composition worry you? Talk about the independence of the Fed. Does that matter into the decision-making process or your decision-making process?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that we're having this conversation in 2025, but it does worry me a little bit, but not considerably. It's not one of my top risks. And the reason is because the way that the FOMC committee at the Fed was built, structured, designed was specifically to not align with the political cycle. So the Fed governors on the board, they have 14-year staggered terms. There just aren't that many opportunities for the president to come in and put new individuals on the committee. So we think it's possible there could be some influence. For instance, if the courts allow Cook to be removed, which actually the appellate court just recently said that they would prevent that from happening. We'll see what the Supreme Court says. So there may be a little bit of influence, but ultimately we think it'll stop there and that the independence of the Fed will be maintained.
So finally, putting it all together, how are you advising clients and advisors to invest considering these ideas?
Yeah, and so when we take all this into account, and these are the key themes that are driving our positioning, on the multi-asset solutions team at Harbor Capital, we manage about $5 billion, and we take all of these critical insights into our dynamic multi-asset strategy, the Harbor Multi-Asset Explorer, the ticker is MAP, M-A-P-P. And in that portfolio, we continue to remain overweight equities. We think we might have some wobbles between now and the end of the year, but we think dips are to be bought. And we think we have a pretty good setup for 2026. So as I said, we own US equities, we own emerging market equities. We're sort of overweight those parts of the market. And we also really like gold. We think as we approach a cutting cycle, as the independence of the Fed is sort of called into question, we think gold makes sense to have as a diversifier in portfolios, as we have held a large allocation to it over the last several years. And we, as I mentioned, we think 2026 could be another very strong year for markets as we look forward.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on and talking about it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.